Hi, it's Tony. Welcome back to Badger's Cottage of Camp K9. We are going to have a little bit of a wander around the garden. Yesterday was a very productive day. I had this undercover area here was absolutely full of tomatoes, and I managed to get the majority of those planted out into the garden, which meant that this then became empty, and my conservatory that was just overrun with everything else that needed to be planted out in the next couple of weeks managed to come out here to be hardened off. So we've now got the remainder of our tomatoes, our courgettes and our squash, a couple more tomatoes that were late started, our dwarf beans. Under here I've got my corn to go out. A few more tomatoes, believe me, I planted too many tomatoes this year. My cucumbers are crazy huge. I need to get those out. My beans, I planted those way too early in the conservatory and couldn't bring them out here and couldn't lower the temperature of the conservatory because I was busy trying to germinate some more seeds, and took my eye off the ball when it came to my beans, and they went absolutely crazy. So now I've got to try and plant those out in the garden. So it feels like it's been a really long spring of everything having to be planted by seed, watching those seedlings grow up, having a beautiful warm April where you're dying to plant it into the ground, knowing that you can't, holding back and making it worth it, because in the first couple of weeks of May we had some rather cold evenings and nights, which would have killed off some of the plants like it did last year, my learning curve last year. Hold on, don't don't plant out. So I learned from the lesson last year, and I've had the patience, but yesterday I definitely wanted to get some of those tomatoes out and into the ground and start things moving along. So I think now might be a good time to do a full garden tour. Now, looking around the place, I can see it's in a bit of a mess. I've been so busy planting that everything else has become complete chaos. You can still see some fleece hanging back here, some empty boxes that have got my plastic bottles in. Those are in storage because I'm going to be planting out my courgettes and my squash soon, hopefully before they get too big. And I don't want the slugs to get to them when they're first going in and they're feeling a bit weak before they burst up and start growing healthily. I'm expecting a little bit of shock, and that can always bring in the slugs. So those bottles there, I aim to go over them so that hopefully whilst they're not feeling their best, the slugs won't attack them. Any other rubbish out there I can see, just things that aren't in their right place. However, the plants in the beds are doing a lot better. We've got a bit further, so let's go have a look. So the radishes were the first thing that I planted this year, and they were the first thing to be harvested. Now, that bed there and that bed there are pretty much harvested now. There's a few more radishes left in there, but the tomatoes are now planted into those beds. This bed here is still all the radishes. I've still got quite a few radishes, and let's see if we can find a nice big one. There we go. Some lovely radishes growing in that bed. And I'm not in a huge rush over this weekend, maybe over the next few days, maybe even over the next week, I'll harvest that one. But I've already harvested a lot from these two beds, and we've still got some inside. We've eaten a lot of them, but we've still got some inside to be eaten. So that slowed me down on that bed and a couple of other beds that have still got some radishes in for planting tomatoes in. But I've still got the tomatoes that are underneath the pergola that are still hardening off. So that's fine. They can harden off and then I will plant them. I will harvest the radish and then the tomatoes can go in there. So this bed is going to be tomatoes, and then I've got the arch here which will be for my cucumbers. So this bay here, let's get to a point where you can probably see it best. There, this run here from there all the way through to there is probably the patch that gets the most sun in the garden. The boats do as well, we'll get to those, but this is not only gets the sun but is the closest to the wall of the house, and this is south facing, so the heat goes down, builds up underneath the pergola and comes back out again, so they almost get double the heat for being in that position. So the tomatoes, this is the first year I've done tomatoes over there, so that's going to be interesting to see what comes up of them. But then again, it's the first year we've had the pergola. The wall has always given heat off of the wall to the house. Sorry, it's easy if you see my face rather than the back of my head, isn't it? So the wall has always reflected back the heat, but now that pergola, the temperature under that pergola gets quite hot, and so hopefully that will give us a little bit more heat, a little bit more boost. Maybe that's where I should be planting my melons, which at the moment I've got planned to keep in the conservatory because I got nothing out here last year. So maybe I'll bring out a couple of melons in tubs underneath the pergola and see how they do this year outdoors, but in there. So that's Chris. So that area along there is dedicated to cucumbers with some tomatoes in there as well. This is the second year of the gojo berry bush, so I'm not quite sure what I'm doing with that. I'm just kind of I'm not very good yet with berries, so I'm just letting it grow at the moment. Probably needs potting up this year. And these, frustratingly enough, this was my asparagus. This was year 3. I was desperately looking forward to eating some asparagus, and it grew up and bolted straight away, and I didn't even see them come. I completely missed the fact that they needed to be harvested. So that was frustrating, but never mind. I might move them for next year. It might be that this area is too hot for them. They are in a pot because I didn't know what or where I was going to put them. So maybe I'll think about moving that. So I've decided that this run along here is going to be my cherry run. My cherry tomato run. So in the first one I've got chocolate cherries. In the second one I've got yellow cherries. And I can't remember what variety I've got in the last one. It's another cherry. I can't remember what it is. My white cherries are my favourite. They are actually behind all the others because I couldn't get hold of the seeds. So this bed, which is the bed that gets the most sun out of the boats, I've dedicated to the white cherries. I'm really hoping to have a good harvest with them. These are some young lettuce that got sown out. They are planned to grow underneath the tomatoes and then be harvested off of there. Underneath the archway we've got some garlic still growing that was planted at the end of last year. I've planted, these are red zebra tomatoes at this end of the boat. These are some spring onions from last year that need to be harvested now. This bed here has got some onions growing in it. They don't need to be harvested yet. They should manage fine underneath the tomatoes. And this variety of tomato is the purple and green tomato, and it's got the potato leaf. In here we've got very similar. Some of these spring onions could be harvested, but we've got onions planned to grow underneath the tomatoes, and in this bed we've got beefsteak tomatoes. Over here we've still got some very late sown radish, and I'm not sure what's going on with this because no root has been formed so far, so they may actually just end up being written off for this year. A few spring onions that need to be harvested now. Look at that, it's about to go to seed. And I can't remember what variety of tomatoes going in there. I think it's the blue. I've got a blue tomato, so I think the blue tomato is planned for there. Over here we've got a similar situation again. There are some radish just in there that will be needed to be harvested. They're not quite ready yet. And some spring onions, they'll keep going for a little while. And in here we've got some heart paste. This is the second boat. We've got some very young spring onions in here that will be fine for a while. And we have 3 mysterious varieties of tomato in this bed. All I saw on the label was they came from China and they are rainbow tomato. Haven't a clue. Didn't germinate last year. Threw the lot into a seed tray this year, and I got, I think it's about 6 plants out of it. These 3 were the strongest. And then I went and dropped the tray. So this one is now our strongest one. This isn't too bad. It lost a couple of stems, but this one here, I pretty much killed it. Anyway, who knows? They might be huge plants and I might not want the middle one there. It might just take up space. So we have some more garlic underneath the archway. I am just trying to contemplate now, do I leave the archways as they are, or do I try and lift the outer arch? Did that make sense? Lift the outer arch. So lift that side and lift that side and bring them up and connect them together at the top here so that I've got an arch that goes, I don't know how to do this on the camera, over like that, over the pathway. I haven't decided yet. I really haven't decided. I will probably end up leaving them like this, but it's just one of the thoughts that's going through my head. So this garden tour is as much for my note taking as it is for sharing with anyone else, because I like to be able to look back and see what I did. Okay, so that is my main area of raised beds. Then we've got some in-ground beds that we've added this year. So this bed along here, which I have to keep shooing the cats off of. They want to use it as their toilet, typically. But this bed along here is going to be dedicated to some squash and some peppers. We have along the fence on this side of the gate and on the other side of the gate there, these are additional in-ground potato beds. I don't normally do my potatoes in ground because I don't like to dig. I don't like to pick up the fork at all. I don't like anything that's too much hard work. And the thought of digging up potatoes really was not something that I was looking forward to. I like to have the bags and to empty the bags and get my potatoes that way because they're nice and simple that way. But given this year is the year of the unknown, I thought it would be better to have more potatoes, so I've gone for in-ground. So this is how they're doing now. They're nicely growing up out of their beds, and I've also started planting the beans. Excuse me. And what I'm hoping is that we're going to have a nice long load of beans that are climbing up my fence panels here, with the potatoes beneath them. So we just added an additional bed here. Just, by the way, all this bark fell off of some logs that we had, and so I just dumped the bark here to break up and to turn into the pathway covering. So at this point, I've really got to say thank you to Kimmy, who is a lady who comes and helps out at the doggy daycare. Because we went quiet over the COVID, we still had some dogs that needed taking care of, so she has been coming in for them, but she's also been coming in and helping me with the garden, and she's been such an incredible help. So Kimmy, thank you so much for that. Anyway, look, Kimmy, look at what's coming up. So we've got some lovely potatoes coming up on both sides, and then hopefully we're going to have a nice bank, a privacy fence hopefully of beans along here, which would be wonderful. What else have we got going on in this area? Oh yes, so these are the Amish pastes that were planted out. They were planted out when it was too warm. I was trying to plant out the tomatoes in the morning, and I got carried away. The temperatures started to go up in the day, and I planted these out when it was too hot, and they're still suffering with a bit of stress. So I'm hoping they're going to recover from that, because we're now 24 hours on. 48 hours on. Okay, we'll wander over to the fruit area. So this is my old apple tree. Now I was looking at that, and we can't reach the top branches to harvest apples. The ones that fall end up getting given to the chickens. Brian is possibly going to have a go at making cider this year. We don't eat as many as it produces, and it casts a huge shade over that area there behind us there. So I'm actually wondering whether it's time to say goodbye. I might just halve the height of the tree so that it's just got the lower branches, so that we can actually reach and harvest what it's got on it. So that lovely apple tree, considering things there. Anyway, let's go around the rest of the things. I've still got all my berries, plants and currant plants in tubs, because I still don't know where I want to put them for definite. They're hidden over in this area, very much hidden, because it's not an area I come to very often, so that they're just left to do their own thing. But also, they don't really get a lot of sun where they are, so they don't do a massive amount of growing. But this is only their second year, so who knows? You never know. In the ground underneath the tree were planted some strawberry plants, and there's very little evidence of them still being here this year, but there are a couple, so I'll update you with those as we go along. This is basically an area I haven't weeded yet, and we have a we have a strawberry plant coming through the weeds there, possibly one down there. The ones that were planted around the back are nowhere to be seen. And then we potentially have a bit of strawberry plant going on here. Clearly I'm no good at planting strawberries, so they probably need an awful lot more sun than I'm allowing them. Anyway, right, we have here the blueberry bush. That seems to be doing well. evidence that we're going to have some blueberries this year. They were very tasty last year. Definitely weren't enough of them. Then we have our thornless blackberry, and that's all of these. I'm amazed here survived the winter. I honestly thought they had died at one point, but as we go through them, this is the thornless blackberry. This is my one thorny bush, which is my raspberry bush. It's a golden raspberry. They're quite delicious. And then these three in no particular order. Oh, the labels on that one, I can see that's black currant. I think that one's red currant, which means that that one's the white currant. So those are my currant bushes. Right, on to my long beds. So, what's going on in here? Well, we still have some cabbages and some broccoli, which actually that broccoli is producing something. I thought that these had all bolted. Yeah, no, they're bolted. So this, oh yeah, this belongs to this plant here. So they have bolted. So the reason I've just left these in here is because I'm not yet ready. This is going to be my main leek area, and I'm not yet ready to plant those. The leeks from last year are what you see along here. I didn't quite plant them right, so they were restricted in size because of the way that I planted them. The brassicas that are left in the top here, I'm basically just picking from them and giving to the chickens. They love them. It's their favourite greens, so I keep them mainly for the chickens. So what else have we got going on here? These were my direct sown beetroot. If you can see here, these are coming through. This is not. This is I filled this bed with some rotting, or I dug in to the bed some rotting straw bedding from the chicken coop when I was using the straw rather than the hemp that I'm using now. And I put it in the bed, and it was great. I thought, yeah, this is wonderful. It started to seed. So I've got the odd bits of grass coming through, but they put up absolutely fine. So those are my beetroot. So this bed this year is going to be, so last year I had the beetroot up that end, and I had lettuces along this end. So now I've got the beetroot this end, and I've got leeks going in at the back end. Anything that you can see that's yellow flower is a brassica that has bolted and gone to seed. So what else have we got in here? Let's have a look at the arches. So these long beds are made up with one central yew bed and then two long beds, one this side and one the other side, and then they have these arches that go between. I couldn't find the cattle panels that they have over in America. They make a lot of arches, a lot of vertical growing with cattle panels over in America, and I couldn't find them here. I have now found something that is similar, but what I used last year was this universal stock fencing, and it comes in a roll and it's a lot cheaper, and then I just cut it to size and made the arches. Now the only thing is that it's fine, it copes with peas and beans absolutely fine, but it did get weighed down and pulled down by the climbing squash that I had growing on it. I just pulled it back into shape afterwards, but there was at one point in the summer when I had some massive squash growing off of it that I had to wedge it up, and because it was just collapsing right down. So peas again, not sure. We've refreshed the earth. We've topped up the earth, I should say, not refreshed it. So the earth in these beds had all dropped down. mainly because we used straw bales and wood, like logs and things, to fill in the bottom of the beds, and then we topped it up with topsoil, and then we put compost on the top of it when we built the beds last year. So that had decomposed and gone down, so I've topped it up this year with a bit of extra topsoil and a bit of extra compost. So there is effectively quite a lot of fresh earth in these beds. So hopefully the peas will be absolutely fine. So I've got peas again growing up and over each of the arches. Last year I had the beans here, but the peas took an awful lot of the light. I think that's what was going on, because the peas were crazy, mad, wonderful crop from the peas, and the beans being further behind them just struggled because they just couldn't really get much of the archway they were sharing with the peas. The peas had taken it over completely. So this year that's why I've moved the beans over to the other fence this year and put the peas over here. Underneath the arches, I've got my potatoes growing. Now they're in the bags here and on the other side. And the great thing about the bags is that if and when the peas are big enough that they are covering the arches and there is no sun coming into the bottom of these archways, and the potatoes may struggle with a lack of light, I can just pick up the bags and I can just move them to another spot where there's more sun. I can see that we already have some nice flowers growing on some of these potatoes. There'll be those earlies. So I've got a mixture of earlies. I believe that this row is earlies, first earlies, and then this row here is second earlies, although I can see flowers in one of those, so maybe I mixed up the bag slightly. And then the ones that I had over against the fence over there in the in-ground beds, they are main crop, so I can hopefully just forget about them. And one thing I never knew about potatoes was that they don't really need a huge amount of watering. And that corner there has been the one corner I've always struggled to get the hose and the sprinkler to reach. And now I know that that is the most ideal place to grow potatoes. So I'm going to remember that for future. Right, what else have we got going on here? Right, the U-bed in the middle. Yep, I'm planting bottles. The reason why I'm planting bottles is that I wasn't quite sure what I was going to use this bed for. I knew I was going to use it for some climbing squash, because the squash will climb up and over the archways just like the peas, and for some trailing squash to come out of the bed and down the middle here. But for a long time that bed was very empty, and I don't really like an empty bed. And so I decided that I had some chard and some spinach seedlings left over, so I thought, right, okay, I will plant them in here. But this is not an area that I really come and have a look at. The peas are in now, and so I tend to just water them, and my focus mainly is on getting these beds over here sorted and the plants out into there. So I was worried that I would take my eye off the ball over here, and I was worried that the slugs may get to it because there's a lot of wood in this bed. So I didn't have enough bottles. So you can see that some of the plants have not got bottles on them, but a lot of the plants have got bottles on them. So the bottles are protecting the young leaves from the slugs, and hopefully I'll have some nice crops out of those later. I didn't grow any chard last year. I don't know why, I forgot. But what I did find was that I found a container that I had put chard in the year before, and that was still growing beautifully. There wasn't much of it, but it was a nice harvest. So I'm quite happy for these to stay here. Hopefully they'll get bigger before the squash takes all the light from them. which will then mean that they will hopefully carry on going after the squash is harvested and have this bed to themselves for the winter. So again, here we've got the peas growing. They're coming on quite. This is my first. There's one on each side, which is strange. And it was the same last year. I think it's because this end towards this end of the bed gets more light, and towards the other end of the bed does not get as much light. Because if you look down here, it's these end ones on this side that are the biggest. The same here on this one. The same here on this one. On this one, yes, they are large, but right up the other end they're large as well. The ones in the middle are small. Strange. I love the way that they intrigue me. So yes, those are my peas. So my peas are doing well at the moment, coming on strong. This is my carrot bed. So, and if you followed any of my earlier videos, basically I used 3 different methods of growing carrots this year. The first method I used was here. These carrots, see these 2 rows of carrots here, they were planted, I think it was a week or 2 weeks apart from each other. They were planted in a gutter, sown into a gutter, and kept in my conservatory to germinate in there because it was warmer in there. That was the first method. The second method, which is the rows here, which you can you see? I don't know if you can see. They're coming up. They're getting some of their true leaves here. So this row goes the same length as the other ones that were grown in the house, and those ones were grown out here under the cover of those pieces of wood. Can you see those planks at the back there? So this was a method I picked up. Sow your seeds, water the ground, sow your seeds, put the plank over. It's meant to be a very, very successful way of growing them. So that was the second way. The third way, I direct sowed. So basically this area from here to here was directly sown, and the way I did that was I put some fresh compost down. I then used what did I use? A bamboo stick, a bean pole, and I made straight lines and I just rubbed it into the ground to make a little divot. Did loads of those lines across, sowed the seeds in, brushed the earth over the top, and then left